This is being recorded, both audio and video. So I would ask that you introduce yourself. And what we ask is that you take about 10 minutes to sort of expand a bit on your application, and then leave us about 20 minutes for lots of questions. Okay?
Okay.
Good. So,
Sounds
welcome.
great. I'm Kathy Ward. I am president of the board for the hospital thrift shop.
I'm Suzanne Albany. I'm on the board of directors for the hospital thrift shop.
And I'm Nancy Moreland. I am the treasurer for the hospital thrift shop.
So before we really get into the numbers for this year or what our request is, we'd like to thank you for your generous vote of support last year, because we are getting ready to start with the construction as soon as the shop closes, which is next week. So we're hoping by November the 1st that we are going to be, under construction. And as you might imagine, with old buildings like ours, which were built in the early 1800s, more was found that needed to be done. So I've met with Maria, and we reprioritized how we're going to spend what you gave us last year, because that sill, if you look at our building, the wall to the right next to the driveway is bowing, and they thought it was going to be something we could push in. The sill is gone, and so that's where the money this year is going to go, to do two things: to repair the sill, to make it a safe building to be in, to remove the water, which we think has caused a lot of the damage, to move that away from the buildings. And so Maria and I have talked about that and how we're going to do it. And we had prioritized for you last year how we would spend our monies, and so we'll go down that priority on keeping the building safe and making it historically correct. So this year, some of the things that were on our budget for last year, we have moved over to this because of the extra costs associated with doing that sill and all the engineering and everything that took place with that. But safety first comes to mind with us, and a lot of it is there's a back L of the building. There's a picture in here of that, which is up on cinder blocks. It's the back, the last wart, if you will, that was put on the building. It's got shims holding the building on the concrete blocks. So what we've got in here are our wish lists for doing it. 2 years ago, we re-shingled the side of the building. Now that it's going to be worked on, the rubble is going to be taken care of, the foundation, and then we want to move to the back side. And the other sides of the building, the west side, the north side, have not been re-shingled in we don't know how many years. So that would be, a project once we get this water away from the building. So what you'll see in here are requests for some of the exterior work that we do. A lot of it has to do with the drainage, which may get reprioritized just because we don't know what we're going to find when we get the drainage. But they blew out, we have the wells under there, and they blew them out. They didn't go anywhere. Some of them they found foam in. So there's going to be some digging and things that take place this year. So we're hoping with our request this year that we would be able to stabilize anything that we find. We know that they've already found a support upstairs in the women's department. When you stand at the cash register, the floor goes like this. So now they know that we need to shore that up. It's going to have to come from the basement all the way up. So we appreciate your consideration for what we want to do, at the shop to make it a safer place to be and to preserve, the building itself, because it has been neglected. We've just put lipstick on it through the years. So we'd like to do some cosmetic on the front if we have the money to do that. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let's start with you, Ian. Start on this side.
Thank you, Ken. So how much do you have left from last year's grant?
We haven't spent any money from last year because when we got the approval for the money, it was in at the town meeting, which was made available in July, but we were in full force with the shop, and we were only open from May until October next week, and so there was really not a way to take that foundation down and still be in business. So we had discussions, and that we would start as soon as the building is closed and ready.
And how much is that? I don't
It's $113,000.
113. So yes, I just bought a lithograph of San Francisco for my son yesterday. So and some books. But I was noticing that in 2013 and 2014, you gave 200,000 and 250,000 to the hospital, and I assume that it will be a similar amount this year that you'll have available. And so I asked myself, especially since we have constraints this end, whether you'd consider sort of matching our funds with subtracting some of the money you give the hospital to put into the building.
Well, we do put aside money, and we do the building is old, and we do a lot of work that we haven't asked you for. I don't know if all of you have come through it, but it's everywhere you look, it needs help.
Unfortunately, I'm tending to be looking at the books, the clothes, rather than
well,
the actual.
So we do a lot. We put aside a lot of money every year, and from the floors to the plumbing. So
Right.
Do you have, I wonder, like $40,000 or $50,000, $60,000 a year, don't we sometimes spend
yeah, or
in?
higher.
Yeah,
Because it just
spending.
needs so much work, and the work hadn't been done for years, and because it was so big, and then we realized it's not going to get any smaller. So every year we put a lot of money back into the building.
All right, did I miss that in the financial statement then about what
Well, it
goes
would be
into
in
the?
repairs.
Okay.
I can break it down, but I believe this past
Just
year,
roughly. Yeah.
I want to say 52,000.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So the general everyday.
Well, there's such a long list, and we only do the things that have to be done, like, because there's a lot. You know, we just deal with drips and certain areas people don't go to. We don't allow people in certain rooms because there's a hole. We don't even what they're in the attic. It's in the windows. We don't even certain windows we don't touch because they would fall out.
In the siding, 2 years ago, I think it was close to $26,000 for the siding and the fixing of those windows on that side. But unfortunately, we didn't have someone who really was looking at a holistic view of the house. They were looking at just putting the shingles on and getting the paint around the window. It was not, why is this side in this condition? And so we feel that this process with you guys has given us the opportunity to get it done right. And so we feel that, we hope that you'll, choose to support these requests that we have. If not, we're going to fix the building because now we know that it needs it. And we're working with the preservation group and a conservationist from Cambridge who is bringing the right people in. And clearly we didn't have that kind of knowledge in the past. So we appreciate your support. And we put, like Nancy said, we do put aside monies. Our mission all along has been, to support the hospital.
Right.
And a lot of volunteers give many. I just left one place within 9 o'clock this morning, left a team of 4 people out there getting donations. So anything you can do to help us with this.
And Brian Pfeiffer, who is your consultant?
Brian Pfeiffer and Wendy Frontera.
Rhea?
I really don't have any questions, and I've been through the building, and it needs a lot of work. And I think that this group has really done a very decent job of trying to maintain it as best they can, and to move forward. They need to do these things, and that wall is just bowing out, and the drainage thing. It's just going to keep. If they don't fix it properly, the building is going to continue to deteriorate. That's just my layman's view of it.
I think I'd like to follow up with Ian on the repairs and the monies that you're holding aside for a maintenance fund in the future. I'd like to get a little bit more hard documentation back on that from you, maybe to look at the past 5 years.
I could do that. And I'll tell you, for instance, in one of the rooms, we call it the sorting room for linens. We know not to put certain things because it rained. Well, we were lucky this summer, but it rained. So that's not something that we even consider an emergency. So there's so many quirky things there that in a normal business you would not allow, you would not be able to see through to the outside, but in our building we could. So I could definitely give you a report of what we've done. I can give you specifics, but we've replaced windows, we've painted, we've done shingling. Sometimes the shingling has led to, okay, so we have to replace the downspouts. And then we made decisions, but we don't have that kind of money, so just fix it. Just fix it. We're not going to be replacing it.
That'd be great, just to get
Yeah.
that back to us, just so we can kind of peruse and see what's going on. And like I said, if you do have an ongoing contingency fund or maintenance plan, that, because I thought I saw something in here that
We do.
referenced you were
We
starting
just
to do.
voted on it Monday.
Okay,
For this
so
coming year.
that's, I think that's a positive thing. The other thing too is that since there's a deed restriction, and this is a historic preservation, I'm kind of curious to know, how does that benefit the public, especially on a year-round basis? Because other ones that we've done are truly open to the public for the historic preservation, and they're year-round. Whereas this is a lot more limited and the access is limited. So it's just, I'm not sure how I want to flesh that out with you yet, but it is something that does kind of come to my concern.
So all the buildings that you work with are open year-round?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, we don't have any heat.
Right now,
That's on
I
our
know.
list. That's like,
Yeah,
So we had the oil tank and all that kind of stuff that was removed, so we have no heat. If we need to have the shop open for a day, a week, or something like that for some, certain hours, then we would certainly work something out. We would prefer not to, because most of our volunteers live off island.
yep.
So we would certainly not want that to be a reason that we're not considered, because we believe we contribute to the overall character of downtown, just as a building that's well kept downtown, when visitors come regardless of what the season is.
Also, I would just say that the deed restriction is on the exterior of the building, and and you can view the exterior of the building
Yeah.
from the street 12 months a year. So from the point of view of what we're maintaining, the historic architectural integrity of the building, it's an exterior restriction, and that is clearly viewable to the public year round.
Right. I'm just looking at it from a more holistic standpoint, because other projects that we've done, I mean, are very clearly something that is what I call accessible to the public. All right, and they're accessible almost on a year-round basis. This isn't. So I just kind of want to get a better sense of how that is going to be a community benefit in the long run of things, and not just from an exterior perspective. So I just want to kind of throw that out to you.
I just a thought. I mean, I think you have to look at the bigger service that the entity provides. The hospital thrift shop funds go back into the community to the hospital. So if you look at that wider umbrella, it kind of covers, in my mind anyway, that's my particular.
But we're certainly
advantage.
providing a community benefit. I don't know that necessarily having the public be able to go inside the building on a year-round basis necessarily adds much to the community benefit. It is open, obviously, to the public 6 months a year, inside and outside.
It just the only reason I bring that up because it draws our mind. We start getting into these gray territories of like, well, okay, why shouldn't we refund a historical preservation of the Boys and Girls Club? That's a community benefit. Why shouldn't we, if the Stop and Shop decides to take over the old fire department and do something, why shouldn't we fund that? That's a community benefit. They give to the community. There's just these gray areas that are starting to concern me somewhat. I'm sorry to say you may be the test subject here for that.
I don't do that.
But no, we're charged. I think as a committee, we're charged with a very real aspect, since we're using both state and local funding
Right.
to do that. So it's just something I need you to put your thinking caps on for a little bit with that one.
But isn't the basis for giving the grant here is for historic preservation purposes? And what we are saying is these funds will be used to stabilize and preserve this historic building. Without doing the work that needs to be done on it, this building could fall apart, literally almost, and that would clearly be not beneficial to the historic street and district that it's in.
And I'm going to challenge that back again, just to say to you that we had something from the Maritime House, I believe it was, which is a private organization, just right down the street from you guys. The Mariner House, thank you. And that, again, you could argue both sides of the equation on that. So, it's just one person's opinion here.
So what would you like to hear, I'm guessing?
I just think I'd like you to give it some thought about beyond just, I can look at the outside of the building and that's it. Just how does that kind of contribute? And maybe some of my colleagues will have a better sense
Dawn
about
and
this
then-
one.
and
Yeah.
then Linda.
I'm wondering if what might be helpful is the money that goes to the hospital. Is it slated for certain things?
It is.
Certain programs?
It does not go into the general fund at all. We are totally separate entity from that. And actually at our board meeting on Monday, we look at what we're going to need for repairs, what we're going to need for operating expenses, and then what's left is the gift to the hospital. I meet with Margot in the summer or in August sometime and talk about what are the needs of the hospital. And the board has decided that we're not going to support things that perhaps won't be there in 2 or 3 years, but things that are transferable. For example, the technology that they need to improve, that they can communicate with the Mass General. Things like that's where our money's going, for new cardiovascular stress testing equipment that will also communicate in Boston. So our money is very specifically directed when we give the money to Martin. Does that answer?
It does. I mean, I'm wondering if you've ever done anything that provides, say, like free clinic type services that would be an open community benefit rather than, I mean, I think that the equipment and the upgrades are excellent, but then I also know that the hospital's in charge of those services. So I'm just wondering if that money's ever gone towards free services for people who can't afford them. It's like
We
a
have
true open
we have in
community.
the past made contributions. You know more about
To
it.
Marla City Lamb, to the Andrew Holgate, and to the Shorty Fund. In the past, we've done that, but we know that they have other big fundraisers for them, and the hospital's in need right now of this new equipment that we want to do. So I think your idea is a good one. I think that, if we can take some of the pressure off what their immediate needs are, maybe that's an opportunity for the hospital to use some of the fundraising that they do toward those.
Linda?
Sorry.
Those of us who were here last year, from campus, when we came in last year, we went over this, public versus non-public versus historical importance in the absolutely dead center of the historical district, actually, versus driving by. And we found years ago, even with the Mariner House, we could have given them money because the building is iconic. It's in the public domain. You can drive by it, you can see the beauty of the building. It's a very unique building architecturally. There's not really another one like it in town. We could have given it. Where we had the problem is it's a private entity. The public is not allowed in there, and you have to have a unit in there. So we were sort of divided on whether I was obviously in favor of maintaining the building. In this situation, not everything we give money to historically for historic preservation is open year-round. But I dare say, knowing all the other projects we've given money to for years, there is more public access in those 6 months at the thrift shop than a lot of these other venues have year-round, if they happen to be open year-round, whether they're limited hours or not. So I think the public access to it is phenomenal, because you're open, 6 days a week?
Yes.
You're open nights on some days.
2 nights a week.
Yeah, and so the public, I mean, they're lined up outside the door half the time trying to get in that building. So I don't think the public access part is a part, it's really an issue here. We did bet this very seriously last year because we hadn't been presented with something that was held privately like that, not like the NHA or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very comfortable giving you the money last year. I'm still comfortable doing that this year. But I see this as totally different from the Boys Club, which is not an historic structure, or the fire station, which is not an historic structure. It's another 100 years maybe.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pre-1796 building that is, I've been through all the building with you guys at length. It's relatively intact. solved a lot of it last year in our presentation last year with you guys. So I'm very positively disposed towards this one, but I think the access by the public is way beyond most of the places we give money to, certainly the boathouse and some of the other things. So I think we pretty much beat that to death last year.
Now, do you have any other questions?
I was just going to add one thing when you said for us to put our thinking caps on in terms of community benefit. And the community benefit is not just that we give money to the hospital, which is the major part of our mission, but there is another community benefit which deals with the public access, which is we do provide a community benefit to a lot of people on this island who don't have a lot of income, and they are able to purchase very good goods, because we don't, it's only, we are selective in terms of what we have, but they're priced very, very, very reasonably. So that's a community benefit that I think we shouldn't overlook. It's not just the money we give to the hospital, but we give a benefit to the people who live here who can't afford the clothing, the furniture, the household goods that wouldn't be able to afford it other than what we are able to provide.
Other questions?
I was actually thinking of that too.
Thank you. A couple questions, and maybe Kathy, you can help me. In taking a look through your financials, I'm trying to best understand as a pre-Civil War building. Linda, you just mentioned Mass Historic, as one entity that might be contributing to structures, if I interpreted that
Very
correctly.
small.
Okay. Can you help me better understand? I mean, I understand all of your costs, and you have a lot of volunteers, luckily. But as it relates to revenue that comes through the 501c3 and grants, what's that breakdown? I'm having difficulty
The money
finding
that we received from you guys last year was the only money we received as a donation or money grant.
Mhm.
So the only way we make money is through donations, and it's donations of items, not money.
Understand.
And so,
Okay.
does that answer that part of your
It does.
question?
I guess my follow-up question to that would be, has your organization exhausted the potential for grants for historic buildings and pre-Civil War buildings for a more substantial renovation?
No, we have not, and I would
Okay.
love to know who they are, because I, would be happy to reach out to these other organizations. This is our first venture of this type, if you will, and I heard at town meeting 2 years ago when the vote was taken on the different organizations that you would contribute to their historical buildings, and it just set off a bell. And I brought it back to the board and asked, perhaps we're eligible for some of this stuff and could get this building back like it should be. So this is our first adventure on making this building whole.
And I appreciate that. I think our support last year and what you requested in this year, respectfully, it is still a Band-Aid to an historical structure, right? And you have, it's such a wonderful facility. And I did enjoy reading, Michael's note from the MPT here that I think the word was interior restrictions. So you're having conversations with the
Not on the interior.
Okay, that's.
Exterior.
Let me see if I can
They're
find that.
thrilled with the interior because it is preserved, and to the point that the plaster up on the southwest room still has the original plaster and pegs that people hung their clothes on, and the original flooring that's up there.
NPT is currently working on the preservation restriction for this important structure.
Yes, but it's an exterior restriction.
Oh, I see. So above where it says retains its exterior appearance as well as its plan, and much of its original interior features. In this particular case, then the NPT is working more on exterior than
Yes,
interior,
it is.
which is
Yes.
interesting because, frankly, part of their DNA is more
Yes. I would like
interior
to-
retention and
Yeah.
right
You know, they've
and
been very-
preservation.
We've had several conversations I have with Michael, and it's clearly their intention to just have a deed restriction on the exterior.
Okay. So I guess to summarize that, and then I do have one other question that's not related to that. It seems to me that the great work that you do, and having a pre-Civil War building, and being your own 501c3 separate from the hospital, that between state funds, private funds, and federal funds for such an iconic historic building, that there would be an opportunity to truly provide the type of capital that's necessary to make sure that the building is maintained and restored to a condition that everybody would love. And then funds such as CPC funds certainly could still support along the way, but we may be able to go from helping you fix bowed walls and eliminating shims from cinder blocks to really helping a larger fund to make the building what the building could and should be.
We would certainly be welcome to any.
And then I have an unrelated question as well, but should we go to Linda, or I have one other question?
Is this a comment on his
Yeah,
question?
the federal and state funding
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of hoops,
Mm-hmm.
difficult getting them. And generally speaking, I've talked to Mass Historic, their grants are nothing.
$10,000.
You know, we're talking 5,000, 10,000, not huge amounts.
Mhm.
So what they're looking for is beyond what they're going to get.
Understood.
That would be a Band-Aid. That would be fix 4 windows on the north side, which a lot of those windows are in serious difficulty. But it's to be a Band-Aid, and they'd be fixing one wall at a time, you know, that kind of stuff, which just has a domino effect. The minute you open an old structure's interior or start ripping off the exterior, you have no idea what kind of can of worms you're running into. So they're pretty well planned out here, because I assume they're coming back next year to fix another part of it, because that whole rear end needs a whole new foundation. That's way beyond what they've got.
It's beyond the scope of where we are right now.
Yeah.
Did you have another question?
I do. So I'll let you recap that. And then only from being, stuck in the private sector for too many years of my life, it's interesting to me that you talk about the service that you provide back to the community on selling accessible clothing. And I don't want to get into your business per se on pricing. My daughter loved walking out with a $12 Ralph Lauren overcoat the other day that on eBay probably would have been $75. So that's another conversation for another time. That's I don't know how you do pricing. But I'm really wondering overall, in the community, do you have any visibility to the people that are purchasing? And I apologize, do you take credit cards?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so
Yes.
if you were working with American Express or any of your credit card suppliers, they could give you data on who is purchasing
We do have all that.
products. So, how many are from 02554 and our other 2 zip codes? How many are from off island?
No, we don't do that. But I think because we all volunteer there, we get a sense of who's shopping, and we have one room that's a little fancier than another one.
Mhm.
And we have people who, the other day, we have people who come in with change, who are looking for clothes, and they come in with change. And then we have other people that give us Amex Platinum cards. So it's all over the place. But we take in, thousands of things go out each day.
Mhm.
Maybe not
It is
thousands,
a tourist
hundreds.
attraction, I will tell you that.
Yeah.
We're
Well-
a tourist attraction as well as a known source on the island for islanders who need things,
Mhm.
who can't afford to go to Marine Lumber or to
Understood.
one of the fancy stores on Main Street.
I love what you do, and please understand my question is less about that. Maybe if some of that was happening, the request would be less than 96. My question or my line of questioning is more about is there additional funds and profitability and margin that would leverage our 96 by changing your revenue stream, your pricing model, and where it comes from? It's frankly not so related to, I think, what will be our discussion for approval, but it was interesting to me just to try to understand how you folks manage those decisions. So thank
I'd
you.
love to have you come spend some time in the sorting room with us. We have a truck and 3 cars being unloaded right now with the town having shut the street down to put power in the house across the street from
Okay.
us. And so we'd love some help this afternoon. That's where we're at.
Okay.
But I would just say this, we are all a group of volunteers,
Yes,
so
I
we
know.
may not be experts in retail, corporations or something like
Mhm.
that, but we do have some volunteers who are pretty knowledgeable about the pricing and what things, what things will move, and one of the things that we feel as a business is it doesn't do us any good to have inventory sit on the shelf.
Absolutely.
So you have to price it to move it, and we have a pretty good sense over experience of what it takes. But also, when something doesn't move, we price it at a certain level, and when it doesn't move, we have sales and we discount it and so forth. So that I think it's not as if we don't consider these things. We may not always be making the same decisions somebody else would make.
And we do
Give it our best shot.
Thank you.
I actually yesterday, because I know American Express charges more, I deliberately gave you a debit card from my off-island bank that charges nothing, because I was cautious. Yeah.
But Ian, I'll tell you, since I'm the director, and we even bring our own trash to the dump if we can. I mean, I can make a dime dance. We are really, really tight. And the credit card company we deal with has a flat rate. So I know about Amex, and so you can use your Amex next time.
Okay.
Christine?
From my perspective, and excuse me, I may lose my voice, two things. I think, Rich, you were going in a direction that I think you actually, as a board of directors, should continue in, and that is, and we did bring it up last year, look for grant money, because it's out there, and I think you are a wonderful business model, and I think there is another service that your business provides, which is for young people in the community. I myself have worked at your hospital thrift shop, donating my time, and I've encouraged young people to go to your thrift shop, where you have very kindly taken them in, and they have learned invaluable lessons, I'm certain, on pricing, selling, what value products mean to people beyond money as well. So that in and of itself, I think, is a wonderful business model. However, I do think you need to look for additional grant monies, and I do believe it's out there. And I think that I felt like I was waiting forever, and a couple of you touched on some things that were so important. Now I feel like it's gone from my mind, but it was the grant money, and maybe if you talk, it'll come back to me. Because now it's just blown out of my head.
Like in the Senate, you can reserve your time.
Thank you. I'm reserving that minute. I apologize.
Tim?
I really don't have a question, but I do have an observation. I heard you mention that there are certain rooms you don't use depending on the weather because it rains.
No, it's areas, it's a sorting area. It's an area that the gals who say, yes, this is good, no, they don't go towards the wall.
It's not an entire room, unfortunately.
Well, I didn't mean to draw anything other than when you have water entering a building, it's causing damage every day. And so as I read through your grant application for this year, I don't really see anything, and I might be wrong. You might tell me, oh yeah, it's item 7 or whatever. But I don't see anything that addresses just getting the building watertight.
That is part of the money that was given to us last year. So
Gotcha.
we haven't started that. So the two things that we want to do is get that wall fixed on the east side of the building, but then the gutters, the downspouts, and this dry well that we don't know where it is. And so that, we're trying to get it tight. We're trying to get the water away from the house. So that is where the concentration will be for the money that we're.
So you think the revenue that you received last year will stop the leak, is what you're saying?
We're hoping. We prioritized it to get the foundation secure, and then they have found not only what they found originally, but then on the other side of the house, on the west side of the house, there's some cracks, and we didn't see them to start with because there's stuff up against it in the foundation. And Ken Austin is working on that, so we think we're in good hands with what she'll find with the foundation.
So we are addressing drainage and water issues with the money the grant money that you gave us last year. We hope those will be sufficient, but
if it's not,
then we will have to do further work.
Right back at you.
Okay. Has the building been scoped with that special light?
I've got it on my list. I'm
Okay.
coming over in 2 weeks.
I think that that should be done. If any other money is to be given from this committee, I
Could you
think
just say that loud?
Say that again.
the
3D.
the 3D laser scanning
3D.
that we have contributed to in the
At
past.
University of Florida.
Yes.
I saw their presentation
And I
2
believe
years
this
ago.
building should be included in that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was signage, because it came up with the Firemen's Association, and I think this is another example of some much-needed signage on, I don't know who is going to be responsible for the signage, but it has an educational component that I think is necessary for people passing by, for visitors. Somebody should know something
Who's
about
the
who
history
you
of the
are,
house?
what you do, and what you're...
That goes
what-
beyond the fact that we have funded. I mean, every project requires signage that has been funded by the
CPC,
CPC.
right.
But what we're talking about is creating an educational component as well, to have the people understand the historical nature of the building and how it's contributed to the community as such.
So you were talking about signage on the outside. That would, obviously, we would have to work with the Preservation Trust, because they have rules about signage.
No, HDC has.
Yeah.
HDC.
Yeah,
Could
so,
you give an example, because I know we've all seen them, but where is one of those
Nobody does it.
signage?
There's a couple of brass ones, bronze ones, whatever they
Yeah.
are, from way back.
That would
but
just
we
be a line
generally
or
don't
two,
allow
though.
those. We generally don't allow those.
No, go ahead, Dawn.
I was gonna say, I think it might need to be inside.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
Perhaps.
it's
Right,
probably
right
something
inside the
to
door
inside.
somewhere in like a glass case
Right.
where you have some.
Where you
more
have an
detail.
explanation.
You've been in there, you know the
But
glass
is there
house,
one
right?
that we can take a look
Yes,
at?
on the right.
Talk to Michael May.
Yeah. Michael May, Preservation Trust, would be able to help you out on that.
Plus, if you
Yeah,
do
the
enter
history's
into
great.
a restriction with Michael May, generally you get those things with basically case, but you get those little half moon things.
Yeah, he's.
Which will go on the building, so that in itself will indicate that there's some historical,
But
and probably
Nancy,
the date
take a
of
look at
building construction.
the,
would be-
if you talk to the NHA too, with respect to the guts of signage as to, with the old jail, and some, just a bit of explanation, or the fire hose car house has some
okay.
signage inside. And with
I
I
respect
think
to,
I recognize, maybe there's like a wooden one with some.
Yeah.
yeah, but it'd be inside, which gives a little bit better explanation of the history and the purpose of it, so that it creates a sense of its character within the
I think
community.
it's very.
And we've got all of that in our history that's in our application, so that's something.
so I'm a little confused. So what you're talking about is the need for signage to explain to the public the history of the house, as opposed to, it's not having to do with getting a CPC grant, or?
Well, that's
No,
something
They're
else.
two
Separate
They're
conversation.
two separate conversations. Number one is that at somewhere within the structure, you have to indicate that this property was protected with funding from the Community Preservation Committee, okay? So that's one of our requirements. The second suggestion we're making to you is that with respect to addressing the issue of the relevance of this building to Nantucket and the community, that by creating signage that talks about the history of the building and the history of the thrift shop in terms of its relationship to the community is really important in terms of creating an educational component, but also would help you in your fundraising and various other initiatives with respect to other grant applicants.
But I would think, in order to, that would have to be on the inside.
On the inside,
And
there's
have
no
a
question.
Something
sign
like
on the
building
outside
such
that
and
should
Yeah,
such,
do that.
starting, it's been
A placard.
thrift shop since
Yeah.
such and such,
Yeah.
providing blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah.
right, yeah. Again, there's some other examples out there, so. Barry?
I echo Christine's sentiment. I think that's a good way to draw your public in and educate them. Dawn, I thought, hit on a really good aspect, which I hadn't thought about in quite a while in terms of public benefit. There were some programs the hospital used to provide which were basically gratis that I think got lost along the way, and that, instead of maybe looking at technology, those are some of the things that you could argue are back our community benefit, like the Well Child Clinic they used to do. The flu clinic was totally free. Now they charge insurance companies for it. Those kind of things, I think, are a community help. The previous human services director used to have a program with you guys that if someone was indigent, they would hand out a ticket to you and you'd allow them to get a bag of goods. Those are the kind of programs I think that are invaluable towards saying, this is the above and beyond that we do as well. Not to argue that you aren't doing a good thing. I just think that when you come to the CPC, it broadens the scope of some of those things that have to be responsive back into the community. The last thing I want to say to you is that, again, like Christine said, I'm going to argue with you. You need to do those $5,000 to $10,000 grants. I'm going to disagree with Linda here on that. Because if you're going to leverage funding, I think you need to leverage as much funding as possible through different sources. So $5,000 to $10,000 is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, that's still better than nothing. And I think we like to see that you're reaching out into those venues as well too, to try to get and leverage additional funding to make this happen.
Who you might want to talk to is Karen Lindsay at the NHA. That says that's her role is grant applications, and so I'm sure she'll be able to share with you some of the organizations that they have found because they have historical issues as well. So
We will certainly, certainly look into that. I would just remind you though that we are an organization that is volunteers.
No,
a lot of these groups have paid people who that's all they do is make grant applications.
We're not disagreeing with you. What we're trying to do is to help you understand that part of what our job is as a committee is to help you find other sources so that we're not the only piggy bank in town.
Right.
Okay, because we can't be your only piggy
we
bank.
understand that.
Because we have such a broad scope of issues that we have to address in the 3 different areas, and we have limited funding. And so part of what we try to do is to help you find other sources of funding that help you achieve what the goal that you set, which we're trying to help you achieve.
One quick question, the 3D laser, who does that, and is there a cost?
The Preservation Institute in Nantucket,
And UF.
and we've funded that work for that last year.
You might think about taking an intern in the summer, a volunteer intern who wants to be a grant writer, and get them involved in your organization.
Because interns don't look for compensation. I mean,
Housing, but
well,
They might even sleep in raining rooms. You never know.
but they can go in the attic, and they just have to roll over and they
Sorry,
can roll
built-in
down.
shower.
Don't open the window, right?
All we're trying to do is to give you some ideas with respect to helping your organization move forward, because we really believe it's a very important part of our community and a real significant contributor to our community. So, we would like to get before the end of the month the financial information that Barry had requested, and I don't think there was anything other specific that we were looking for relative to this time before we go into our considerations. So, are there any other questions anyone has? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your consideration.
She was speaking in a private capacity about the HCC and signage. You know about it, right?
Nancy, are you guys still open?
Yeah, we are. We're having, our last day is next Thursday, and part of the community thing, what we're doing this year, we used to have free day at the end. We're not. We're going to have a big sale up until Wednesday. And then Wednesday afternoon, we're going to put day before we close, put things aside for nonprofits here on island. Clothing, bedding, whatever. And then what's left over, well, the real fire sale. But we're very aware that we specifically fund Nantucket. We're not interested in funding the building itself. We want to make sure, that's why we did the Shorty Fund, that's why we gave to the Marla Lamb, to PASCOM, because we want to fund people and not paint. So.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you.
No, we're all set. I'm just doing a quick intro, and they're really good.
We're fine.
Thank you.
Hello.
See you very much.
He's going to be low key.
Yes.
I can't believe that come out.
I was really all set, thank you.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay. This is, as in the past, this is being recorded, both audio and video. So I would ask that you introduce yourself and then take about 15 minutes or so to flush out your presentation, and then give us the last of the time between now and 12 noon for our questions back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kamal McCarthy. I'm the Nantucket Site Manager for the Museum of African American History. I'm going to take this time to quickly give a handout, but before I do so, I'd like to quickly introduce Catherine Douglas Stone, the Chair of the Board of Directors for the Museum of African American History. There's also Marcia Fader, the Historic Preservationist, and Diana Parkon, the Director of Facilities and Capital Improvement. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. Thank you for having us.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for seeing us. As Kamal said, my name is Kathy Douglas Stone, and I am the chair of the Museum of African American History in Boston and Nantucket, our complete name. I first want to thank you very much for the CPC's previous commitments and money that you have given us that has taken our Nantucket campus to the level that it is now. And when I finish my very brief remarks, Diana is going to tell you how we've spent that money, and Marcia is going to tell you about our proposal, so that we can hopefully bring this project to completion by 2017, which will be our 50th anniversary. And it will also reflect the end of our renovations in Boston to the A.B.L. Smith School and the and our African Meeting House there. So hopefully our complex will be ready for our next 50 or 100 years. And we're very proud of this campus, which has been in such few hands from 1774 through today, showing each of the centuries life on Nantucket, the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th, and now the 21st century. And in a remarkably small space, we can share that history and the early history of our country to the students and classrooms here in Nantucket. The museum is principally committed to education, and we are hoping to be able to work with the schools here in Nantucket in a way that we always have in the Boston area. I can answer any question, but I think it's more important to turn this over to Diana.
Hi, Diana Parkon, Director of Capital Improvements and Facility Operations. Again, thank you for having us here and having the opportunity to submit an application. Your generous support has allowed us to complete the exteriors of the 4 buildings, the main house, in the 2 outbuildings, the garage, and in the cottage, the small cottage. We are currently in progress with the hen house. That hasn't been, Marcia will go into more detail about that, but we are in progress. We have received approvals from the HDC here and working with other permitting agencies on island. With that being said, the main house, as you all have probably rode by recently, has been remarkably outside restored, and we are very proud that we were able to do that. We had to do some reinforcement because once we got into the building and started opening up, we found that it was lacking the structural integrity. So that kind of took some time in getting the right people in there to do that. We have upgraded the electrical, the restoration of the windows and doors, and repair of the foundation. When we opened it up, and the deterioration, especially the sill, the front sill, at the porch level was, we're fortunate that the building didn't collapse, let me just say that much. So we've restored that, put a new concrete porch slab, the window sash is restored, the kitchen pantry area restored, and is progressing. That's part of what we need to do in the interior. Structural engineering assessment was done. We trenched underground, took this power supply, and instead of having those wires, we brought that all underground. The new north wall foundation retaining wall was installed. That was in pretty bad shape, and we had to do some archaeology because of the Section 106 of the Preservation Act. So we had the FIS Center from UMass Boston. They performed a tremendous amount of archaeology, and the finds that they were able to gather will assist us in telling this story and using that as part of our educational program once everything has been assessed and interpreted. But we are committed to using that for our education program. Exterior painting, like I said, the structural reinforcement of the north wall, first and second floor framing, plumbing and electrical wiring, prepared for the installation. We haven't done that yet for the drainage, but we have the design, and downspouts and new roof and shingles, wiring for the kitchen fixtures are installed, and the outbuildings, I'm very proud of that. They were sitting on the ground, and with your help and some others, we have been able to excavate and build a new foundation and place the buildings back, those two buildings, the cottage and the garage. And that's the plan for the hen house also. So moving forward, these buildings are weather tight and ready for the next phase. So I will now turn this over to Marsha. Thank you.
I'm Marcia Fader, and I've been on the project for several years, working with the museum and greatly appreciating, again, the funding that we've received. Our focus is not the typical focus in the sense that we've, and to build, you kind of work from the inside and you build out. We've worked from the outside in. So we've been very conscientious about addressing the exterior building envelope, making sure that we are secure and weather tight, water tight, and all of those decisions have been made as we're working through with 4 buildings to maintain them. The oldest one, as you'll see on the handout, is the main house, the Boston Higginbotham house. That's the 1774. That's had well over 200 years of African American ownership. It has incredible detailing. Its original floor plan, and that was really began our major focus over the last 2 years. We have shifted the attention in the sense that we did not complete that main house on the interior, as Diana has mentioned. They're prepped and roughed in, and we're so ready to be completed, but the attention, as you'll see on that handout, we've listed there are 5 buildings on the site, and there's another structure that's almost like dealing with an additional 6th building, and that's what is called the retaining wall, and that runs along the property line behind all of the buildings. We could not move to working on the garage and the cottage until we rebuilt what had structurally failed, which is that retaining wall. There was a lot of surveying work to determine whose wall it was, a lot of engineering. The buildings are within 2 feet of that wall, so all of the design, the structural design for the new foundations had to be completely integrated with that wall. And as you may have seen over the last year, because we've submitted photographs of that work, it was a fantastic job that Toscana did. Gary Heiser was there, and it was all, I mean, the whole backyard essentially was excavated, and this followed in a rather good sequence for us because it followed the archaeological work. We worked closely with the Mass Historical Commission to have permission. I mean, there were just a lot of pieces to have to fall into place to make that happen. And that all happened this last spring in April and May, that the wall was removed, the new footings were put in, the garage was lifted out of place, so we were poised to excavate, put the new wall in, put the 2 new foundations in, and the 2 buildings, the garage and the cottage were placed back. And then they had complete restoration of the roofing, the trim, the shingling. But again, this particular application that we're coming forward with addresses the full scope of the site, and we're completely geared toward completion. All that infrastructure has been taken care of, but in order for us to complete the garage, which will become an educational workshop, to do the cottage, which will be a visitor reception, and to complete the main house, which is where we will house the scholars and the teachers, the visiting interns. This is what our current work is based upon, so that we finally can move to the inside and bring the completion. The hen house is the structure that we are now working on from last year's grant. It's focused on doing that same kind of process where we are lifting that, excavating, putting a new foundation. And that's a real key structure that I think the museum would have preferred to begin on, because that's where we'll get public restrooms for the whole site. And that's one thing that's been tremendously lacking since the completion of the meeting house, because there are no facilities. So I'm working closely with the Architectural Access Board to provide accessibility to all of these outbuildings, which is not an easy task in that the grade completely slopes down. But from the meeting house to the hen house, which would be the restrooms, to the cottage and to the garage, we will have an accessible route. And all of those door openings, we've had approval through the preservation easements to make them accessible widths. So we'll have that kind of accessibility to a greater public. But that is really, in a general sense, what this grant application here is focused on. 3 structures: the main house, the garage, and the cottage, all of which will enable the museum to begin their full educational programming. So everything has been prepped, roughed in, but we need the funding, which is essentially the same funding from the last couple of years. It's not something new for any of us. We've understood the full scope of what's before us, but we are working on 2 properties with 5 structures. And we also were able, because of the extended work this past year on the retaining wall, that took us at least $70,000 for that one wall construction and design, that we were able to call upon a $100,000 separate grant that we needed to pull in for completing that work. Again, our approach has been to be very conscientious about the historic structures, making them watertight, and leaving the interior work to this point. So this application, we're geared toward completion for next, a year from now. So we're clear with the detailing so that with this grant we could be Thank you.
Thank you for the
We'll
opportunity.
start with Linda, go around this way.
You hear the same spiel every year. You guys have been going here since CPC started. It's been going on for some time now. Just keep going. We may have to prioritize some stuff and cut some stuff. And I'm just looking at the list of stuff you have. You've got contingency fees, you've got design management, you've got furnishings. And I think your main thrust is to get the buildings themselves done, not so much the shelving, some of the other ancillary stuff. So that's just where I'm thinking. I see you're gonna go HVAC on all the buildings.
The outbuildings.
The outbuildings, the main house will go with its existing historic heating system, but on the handout, I did suggest we had reviewed if we needed to prioritize. We felt that the most logical one was to separate the buildings and complete the main house, and that figure is on the.
274,
Yeah.
278.
So
Yes.
that's your first priority. I would
Yes.
assume the
That would
cottage is
be-
your second, because that's what you're gonna be entering, so it's point of entry.
Mhm.
Okay, and then the garage is the third one.
Yes.
That's where they did the most excavating, if I recall. They dug down way below that building,
Right.
down in a hole.
Yes, the garage is the building that had the greatest amount of archaeological findings.
And how much money do you have left from all the other years?
But we're working on the focused amount, which was 188 for the hen house.
And that's what we
And that's
have remaining.
completely
Okay, so the hen house is
designated.
left. Because I know we just approved it at the HDC.
So the hen house sum should bring us from beginning and completion to that one building for the restrooms.
And then, some years ago, a few years older, but I saw a lot of those artifacts they were pulling out of that thing. I mean, the pipes, the money, the this, the that,
The
I mean, all
buttons,
kinds
yeah.
of cool stuff. I mean, just reams of it. There was some concern some time ago that those artifacts were actually going to go to Boston as opposed to stay here because they're relevant here.
They did go to Boston.
They did go to Boston because the state, by law, the state is the owner of the archaeology. However, they're in the possession right now of UMass Boston Fish Center, who they are cleaned and cataloged, and they have a person that is interpreting them and how they related back in time to this building, so we can associate it with the different families that lived in the building, starting with Seneca Boston and his wife, Thankful Micah. So, unfortunately, because it is archaeology, the state owns it. But what we will do is there is this process that we're going to use, and it's a virtual, it's a program, and Marcia can get a little bit more in depth about that. But we can have the items so people can see them. You can't touch, but it'll be more of a 3D type of presentation. So
what we'll actually do is, because we can't archive those artifacts here, and there were hundreds of thousands of artifacts taken. There were not just 100 or 200, hundreds of thousands of artifacts, and that are being studied at this time, and the subject of many doctoral theses are coming from those. But in doing research, we've understood that there is a 3D scanning technology that we're proposing to use in the garage. So it'll become what we understand will be a virtual 3D curation garage. So we can have artifacts on temporary loan that will then be 3D scanned, that would become part of the intern program, the interns that will be able to stay in the main house, that would be able to have classes through the summer, the good season, in which they would be able to scan these items, and it becomes part of a database, a global database. So all of that information becomes useful for, it's something that we really don't have on this island in terms of the archaeological exhibits. We don't, and then
you actually use a 3D printer and you can print these artifacts so that they can in fact be handled. And we are so incredible. We've presented this idea, this proposal to UMass because we needed their approval in order to do the excavation and so forth on the garage, so that we would have this. It would not be limited to an archaeological educational format in the garage, but that's really our focus because that was the real hotspot for the archaeology, just tremendous. They were down 8 feet in the ground and with the Native American artifacts. But this would enable us to do, with the latest technology, scan the artifact. It enters all of that information into a database that becomes useful around the globe, and it becomes useful here for handling, for observation, for the classwork here. So we're tremendously excited about something that's really not being done even in New England yet. It's really being done in the state of Virginia right now.
But the issue is that the artifacts physically
Physically
will not be back
reside.
on Nantucket, like the Whaling Museum has a lot of old artifacts that they've collected over the years.
Exactly.
But they would not be able to be physically returned here.
They would be here temporarily for that scanning procedure.
But we just don't have
We
the
don't have the
climate
climate
control. We don't have that,
And we
you know,
don't
that
own
area.
them.
And we don't, we don't own them.
We didn't really understand that. Well, maybe you did understand. We don't really. We
Other
didn't.
questions, Linda?
No, I think, I just wanted to know what your priorities were. I know you have a sort of a target date of 2017, which will be our FY 17
Mhm.
also, starting next July. But I just see some things that we could probably cut out here and there that would still advance the structures themselves. So I just wonder if that's something you guys are okay with?
I think, as we've discussed, we felt that we'd rather complete a
Complete
building
one, yeah.
so that it could at least, we could be using if, but our focus is really, in other grant applications that we're definitely focused on completion, the next year.
Tim?
Mr. Chairman, I don't really have any specific questions, but I would like to say that with your help as a rookie on the committee here, you suggested that maybe I take on this project for the committee, and I must say I'm stunned at how much history is there and how the story hasn't really got out. I remember in the 60s walking to school every day by the meeting house, and it was wrapped in tar paper and just falling apart. And it was like that my whole childhood. I mean, and to think where this project has come. I guess I would just say that this, in my opinion, is an untapped treasure of Nantucket, and I am so grateful that the project is starting to see the light of day. And I look, you have my support on this. I'm a believer, and I hope the committee sees the same. I'm sure you do with the history that you've shown.
Christine?
Following up on what Linda had asked you about the design and management fees and whatnot, you have a line item here under the garage, the archaeological report and program. Is that what you were referencing, the $50,000?
Yes,
That is taking the 3D images? Would that is
No, that is
this-
the actual report. They took all the artifacts and they're under study and so we will have a very extensive report that will, again, it won't just be a report that gathers documents. It will be used for the program,
What does this report look like? Is it a typed
yes,
Yes.
it is a written.
100-page manual on all,
Yes.
listing all the artifacts?
Yes,
It's
and
a
the
catalog.
interpretation of the, over the years, the association of the families that lived on the property.
So they're able to identify each individual piece and catalog them,
So that cost to you is $50,000.
Yes,
yes.
And who has identified that cost?
This is,
I mean, that price for that?
It is directly from the Fisk Center.
Fisk Center.
Fisk
An
Center?
archaeologist.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was a necessary component of the excavation.
Okay.
wanted to commend you on the archaeological work, from having lived in town for the first couple of years since I've been here, and seeing all of the private sector work that's taking place. It's fascinating to me that it's not, or it can't be made a requirement, on the island, that when people are taking down buildings from the 1800s and redoing them, that's not part of our standard operating procedure. So I'm thrilled that you did it, and to hear that it was, how many items? Over 100,000 items. So I think my wife was able to get a great old bottle from one of the buildings on Federal Street, from the construction guys. But it's fascinating that that's not done as a requirement more often. So thank you for that work. I also wanted to congratulate the larger organization for getting money from the Patriots. So it's nice to know that the Patriots Foundation is contributing to your work on Nantucket. So, but to your point, I haven't spent as much time there, but you folks have been under construction as well, since my family's been on island for a few years. But it's such a rich story that I agree is almost yet to be told, and no offense meant by that. It's interesting to me, and there's good parts of that story and bad parts of the story, as you're more aware of than I would be. But
it provides a different lens for everybody to see this history and to add to the history of Nantucket. This is just something that's been untapped.
Yeah. So I think the work's fantastic. The only request that I would have, and it may be in here, so we have a tendency, full disclosure, sometimes we speed read. The amount of time and capital and work that's been done, over the last 5 or 10 years, and what for that specific property, what's the total investment? What's been this CPC request and contribution? Where are you getting other funding from your organization, other grants? Is there visibility to that here? I didn't see it.
It's not.
It's on page 5. And then on page 6, Park Service.
Right, he's asking how much is CPC.
Oh, how much is CPC? It's not here.
CPC to date, we have over the years, which includes the African Meeting House in the other building, we have received $899,115.
Okay. And the total expense.
And that's the total expense that except for the 188 for the hen house.
But Rich's question is, that represents what percentage of your expense relative to this project? Are we 60%? Are we 80%? Are we 90%?
Go back to 1989 and the purchases of the property. I think we'd have to get back to you
Yeah,
to
could
give
you
you
do
a
that?
read.
Yeah,
Because I'd like to put
split.
correct, right,
Yeah.
and we'll send
Yeah, I would
it
love to
back.
have visibility of that, because while we look at this and as a percentage of our allocation,
Sure.
we have a lot of heart for the project. It looks like it's a lot of money, but clearly, the investment that's been made to procure, to manage, and to maintain that property, where I would imagine we're a smaller percentage of that, and having visibility to what that commitment has been to date, I think would be interesting. That's fine.
We've been dealing with the building.
We'll figure it out. You give to us what you
Sure,
think.
and you can
we got,
analyze
and
it.
We can
Yeah.
analyze it.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
What you're doing is amazing, and I'm really excited for the whole thing to be open to the public. My question is just in regard to the prioritization, because my understanding from the presentation is that the house itself will not be open to the public. It will be used to house visiting people.
It will not be a house museum that doesn't function as a house. It will continue to function as housing, which we could not look, not to do. But it will also be used for receptions. It will be open to the public for tours. But it will
So
not
it will
be in
function at that
historically
time.
way.
I was just hoping to see the buildings that would be open to the public more all of the time, maybe be shifted into the priority rather than completing an interior of a house that's going to be used for non-year-round residents.
It's just kind of a catch-22 for us, because without housing people,
You can't.
we
And-
can't
and-
function
and-
in the other buildings,
So-
we're definitely torn with it also, but.
Yeah, that was just, you know,
No,
with
but
the,
it'll
with the
definitely
CPC,
be
that the priority.
open to the public.
Okay.
And certain rooms, of course, if we have a scholar there, but we'll have tours, we'll have lectures. You
Yeah.
know, we hope
We'll
to.
have the smaller lectures and
Yeah.
receptions, so people will get a sense of what took place in these buildings, you know, from the Boston family all the way up to the Higginbotham family. So that story will be told.
Okay. I mean, just sort of looking through this, I'm wondering if the little cuts can be made, like fireplaces or it's like garbage disposal, like just the little pieces where you could somehow knock this
Live
down to
without-
$10,000 or
yeah.
$15,000 because they're not
Yeah, we can-
necessities or necessarily important to the
take a look
historic
at-
character.
Yeah, at some of that, part of it.
We're gonna have to make decisions.
Right.
That's what I asked.
Barry?
Two things. First of all, you're going to have to excuse me in just a few moments. I've got a teleconference coming up at 12 noon, so I might have to split out of here very quickly. So I apologize for that in advance. I agree with Dawn. I think that as we look at this, I mean, you guys have done tremendous work. There's no question about it. Sitting on this committee from day one to see where you're at today is just like, wow, it's amazing. So I'm really happy to see the progress that's been made so far. I think as we're getting into the adaptive reuse of the buildings, the exterior, fine, I got that, and I think I would encourage you to continue along those uses. When we start getting into the interiors of the building, I think that's where this committee needs to be a little bit more prudent about how those funds are being spent. There are certain things I would really love you to kind of flesh out for me a little bit more and get back to us on.
Certainly.
So one thing that came up was the archaeological report. I think just having that in writing to have a sense of what how that $50,000 is being constructed and spent. You've got almost $50,000 worth of design and management fees between the three buildings. To have a better sense of how that $50,000 comes into play, I think would be helpful. You've got almost $66,000 in the first two buildings, the cottage and the garage, for interior and exterior furnishings. Again, I'd like to see that in a more detailed fashion about what that means. You talk about, and when we get to the Higginbotham house itself, there's $25,000 worth of furniture restoration. Again, just to have a better sense of what that is, flesh that out to me as to how you got there. The remaining carpentry, again, I'd like to see that kind of fleshed out in regards to historic versus new structure that you may be putting in. On interiors, I would be fine with historic things, but if you're renovating to accommodate a new bedroom or something, maybe that's where we need to have some discussions. So to have a better breakdown of what that is, that would be funding. As Dawn said, certainly the appliances thing catches my attention as well too. So to get a little more holistic sense of what's occurring with that funding, I think would be tremendously helpful for this committee. Because, again, here we are, and we aren't really recognizing as much as we'd love to from the state. So, again, tough decisions are going to have to be made in the course of the next month or so in terms of what we're funding, how we're funding it, and, again, trying to remain consistent with the scope and mission of what the CPC is tasked with. So that would really be helpful. But great job so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just
You'll excuse me.
Yeah.
One quick question. You've got $15,000 for the stove, but then you're going to have a campaign to raise money for the stove. Is the stove 30 and you're raising half, and we're giving him?
No. This is what has been estimated. Marcia has contacted a gentleman off island who will accept, he restores this type of stove and to get it over. So we're just showing here what this cost is. And we're going to do a crowdsourcing the first of the year, because this is something that I think people would love to see, and the stove and its meaning and its relationship to Florence Higginbotham. So.
So I found it difficult sometimes to separate between what was happening in Boston and what was happening in Nantucket. And for instance, on page 11, although this is sort of an aside, you said combined, the museum's Boston and Nantucket sites annually attract approximately 30,000 students, etc. So I was curious if you had a breakdown between the two, or we're going to have a breakdown next year of the visitors to the two sites.
Okay.
Yes, we can tell you
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
have, sure.
And-
Of course, now, well, please.
No, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, we'll get back to you.
A breakdown of the visitation.
And it sort of goes deeper than that, but I'll get to that. So following up on Christine's question, how much, I was curious as to how much the Fisk Center is contributing to the archaeological report. And why are you paying really anything if you don't own the artifacts? I mean, that really must be rather
It's for their labor and time and expertise.
Well, are they contributing anything at all, or are they strictly?
Well, they did the excavation, this analysis, and the report. That's the actual site work.
But they're also retaining ownership?
No,
who-
the state
The state is retaining, I'm
the
sorry,
ownership.
I was a bit confused on that.
Yes, when anything is discovered, like on
Right.
the big dig in Boston, there's an automatic.
Gotcha.
Yes, and then it belongs to them. No, but again, a breakdown would be helpful of what they contributed that we did not spend
Right.
and what we have to do, and we can
Right.
get that for you.
And I noticed that the 3D, 3D costs that you mentioned on page 10 are not included in those estimates, as far as I can see.
No,
But-
next year.
Next year? and so-
Next year, or some
Well,
other,
or,
some other source.
some other source
Yeah.
that we're looking at. We have some other proposals that are out there or ready to, are poised to be submitted to help us meet our goal to finish this project by 2017.
So in your financial statements on page 44, 45, I was curious as to why salaries had jumped from 646 to 804,000. And you're hiring more people? Or?
We have some additional people that were hired.
Yeah. And then on expenses, it says for 1.56 million, it's African American history, education and development, distribution and printing of educational materials, exhibits, and community use of facilities. And again, I'm looking at this and thinking, well, there's no breakdown between Boston and Nantucket, and I wanted to get a greater sense of what that represented.
For Nantucket, it's obviously much less because Kamal and others, we have a lot of programming. We can't do long-form programming because we haven't finished our bathrooms. And the state requires that. So when we finish them, and that's all funded, thanks to you and other monies that we have received, the programming will be much more, and so much of what we give you back will, at this point, lie to Boston. But I'm very happy to separate them for you.
That would be great.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Certainly, it's.
And then on Rich's point about the Patriots donating 10,000, he did actually say Nantucket, he added, and I thought, well, actually, there's nothing in here, and clearly.
Well, it was an unrestricted grant.
It was unrestricted,
Yes.
exactly.
A portion of.
Yes,
And,
yes, but it doesn't mean that we're ever hopeful that
But-
we can't go back
And that was going to be my question, is that the only restricted grant, I assume, on this is the CPC, right, for Nantucket.
Yes.
Because I noticed that Amos Hostetter
Yes.
contributed 430,000, and I assume that's into a general fund? I mean, we can't persuade him to donate to Nantucket?
The Hostetter family has been very generous, and that's not their only gift.
Right.
And they are big supporters, and
Right.
in fact, they are very big supporters and frequently come to the site here.
Yeah.
And
Right.
unannounced, and just when they're here in the summer. That's, more personal than I have to get, but they're very generous givers
Right.
to the museum.
Right. A lot of us know, actually.
Good. Well, thank you
So,
for us.
That's just about it, I think.
Good.
So, thank you.
Linda and then Rich.
I think, having been on almost since the beginning of CPC, we've seen a lot of groups come and go in here. And I've always been impressed. It took a while to get the project started, after we gave it the first money. But we were talking earlier with other applicants about, have you gone and sought other funding and grants? But this has always been one of the groups that's paramount and just a paragon of we're going to go find money where we can find money. So you guys have sort of blazed the trail for me with these various 501c3s that we see about actively going out, getting money from every corner of the universe that you can possibly get money from. It's a very diverse group that have given you money. And I look at the unrestricted grants as whatever benefits the parent in Boston comes back to Nantucket and benefits the Nantucket project, because it's sort of an unusual situation where it's owned by a parent company in Boston that has total control of the property here. We don't see that very often here. It might be one of the only ones we've ever seen that does that. But everything that goes to you as a parent company benefits Nantucket as well. So I'm not as concerned about restricted grants for Nantucket, though it would be nice to have $1 million in restricted grants here. But whatever you get up there, you plow back into Nantucket. So it doesn't stay up there.
No.
So I'm very supportive of all your efforts, and I wish you could give a tutorial for us at some of these other groups as to how to get it and where to get it. Because we have some groups that are just starting out trying to figure out where to get other grant money. And you heard some of the
Yes.
presentations of the group before us. They're just in the beginning stage. So they're relatively clueless. But you guys have done a terrific job. And once you got started, you've done a very good job moving forward.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
We do try, but we recognize that we could never have done it without the CPC. I mean, just simply couldn't do it. Now, when everything's done, what our goal is, of course, we can fundraise, and we can fundraise more here because we will have people here. And I think just the uniqueness of how we will deal with archaeology. And what place will have 10,000 objects? Most of them will be from the 18th century in the whole country, will be right here and available. So we can't thank you enough, and we will. We'll really try to augment every time with other money, and we can say we have this money, and that makes people feel that they can give us. So your money not only does the day-to-day trick, it gives us credibility in the broader world, and that's really important when we go back to.
Rich, you have a last question?
Yes, and Ian, I'm not sure if this would satisfy some of your line of questioning as well. So it's as we had requested to take a look back at the last 5 or 10 years and the amount of capital and money and effort that's been spent, and then in relation to that, what's the percent of CPC funding, right? So, but I'm wondering if there's visibility, or if you have it, or if you would share it. What's your move forward pro forma, right? So what in fact is the expectation about, completing the project and operating budget and et cetera? So how much of the funding and the capital and the management will in fact be spent to manage and maintain? And that might be too hard of an ask, and I don't know, Ian, if that would satisfy you, but it starts to get at the commitment of the larger organization to the island community, and whether something like that exists.
I can't say it exists, but at the end of this month, on October 28th, the board member who is in charge of the facilities is bringing a group of our board down here to do what I just did this afternoon, which is seen photographs, but to see exactly what's been done. And we have had in our planning for last year and this year, how do we begin to tie in our marketing? I mean, we always say Boston and Nantucket, but now how do we, with this prospect of inviting people to the site, how do we get our marketing? How do we do all of these things? How do we unite them into a single panorama from 1774 to the modern day, where with the two sites are considered the most important historic sites, because African American history in the whole country. The abolitionist movement began in the basement of the African Meeting House, and we have the nephew of William Lloyd Garrison on our board, the great nephew. We've always had a Garrison. So the whole history of the abolitionist movement and the beginning of the challenge to legal segregation in education, which began in the Meeting House in Boston, led intellectually to Brown versus Board of Education, which intellectually leads to the foundations of the women's right and civil rights legislation, which now is taking shape in the form of gay rights. So the history of the United States and the expansion of the term person in the Constitution, which began in our wonderful region here, and people who have brought this to fruition, so that all of us in this room are considered full persons for the purposes of law, began here and began in Boston. And that's a day-to-day interaction with all that goes on here. And we have used our buildings as a way of telling the story. And we wish to tell the story because it's everyone's heritage. And when we go abroad, that's what people know us for. And so that's why we're here.
Yeah, and we, like Kathy said, the end of the month, the committee will be coming down, and we'll be looking, now that these buildings will be completed, our plan to maintain, to operate, and how we move forward. It's just, okay, it's wonderful, we have these nice looking buildings and we want to do these programs, but let's be honest, we need money to operate, and so that will be a separate function, and how we obtain that type of money, what grants that we apply for. So those are things that are in progress. We don't have the pro forma on that just yet, but that is what the discussion will be started the end of this month with the committee members coming down.
And we're already trying to apply for, how do we put together a 50-year plan for all the sites, and so that's what we are.
Thank
We're
you.
always scrambling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, nobody ever says that to us. So
Thank you.
It's nice to hear.
We started from zero.
Today has been really, for me, refreshing, because with Linda, I've been on the CPC since the beginning. And as you probably remember, we had a rough start with respect to this project. We tripped over ourselves, and then we finally found out that we liked each other, and so we made up, and we've been playing nice ever since.
And we've been going, full steam ahead here.
And I just want to reaffirm, I'm just so proud of what you've been able to achieve at this point in time. You heard from us what we would like to have additional information. If you could get it to us before the end of the month, that would be really terrific, because so that we have it before we go into our deliberation.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for coming down, and thank you for an excellent presentation today. And I want to thank the committee for some really thoughtful and hard work in terms of all of the sessions that we've had today. I will see all of you tomorrow again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.